Russian forces near Ukraine in the next several weeks. A portion of those soldiers have already moved closer to Ukraine. We are increasingly concerned Russia intends to use these soldiers in combat or to support combat operations against Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk Oblast near the border with Ukraine. We are watching closely for such indications and consulting with our Ukrainian partners. We urge Russia not to take these steps. Should DPRK soldiers be used in the battlefield, this would mark a further and serious escalation of the conflict. The decision to deploy North Korean soldiers would also be an inescapably clear demonstration that Russia is growing more desperate, having already suffered more than 500,000 casualties. Russia knows the DPRK threatens peace and security in the region. The Kremlin knows the DPRK's unlawful ballistic missile and nuclear weapons programs undermine the non-proliferation regime that has helped to keep the world safe from nuclear war for decades. Russia knows the DPRK is a pariah with one of the world's worst human rights records. Russia would not turn to the DPRK for a military alliance unless it were desperate and had run out of options. Madam President, just a few years ago, Russia supported multiple Security Council resolutions prohibiting both arms transfers involving North Korea and provision of military assistance to North Korea. Russia's training of DPRK soldiers involving arms or related materiel is a violation of Security Council resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2270. Each of those resolutions imposed restrictions on military cooperation with the DPRK because the DPRK's actions, including its unlawful nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs, threaten peace and security. Now, Moscow is not only engaging in both of those activities to support its unprovoked war, but has signed a mutual defense agreement with Pyongyang. This council, including the Russian Federation, also imposed arms embargoes on Iran and the DPRK to deter those countries' unlawful weapons of mass destruction programs. We question what Russia must be giving to the DPRK and Iran in return for their assistance. At a minimum, we know Russia is blocking the DPRK Sanctions Committee from operating. That committee is a safeguard against the DPRK's development of nuclear weapons. Russia's increasing military dependence on Iran and the DPRK is endangering the world.
Ensuring the protection of humanitarian space across Ukraine is essential. We express our concern over the incidents of violence against humanitarian workers and damage to humanitarian hubs and assets in the vicinity of the front line. We again call for all parties to ensure the safety and security of all UN and humanitarian personnel and facilitate the life-saving operations. The situation of children in temporarily controlled or occupied territories of Ukraine remains dire and in need of more humanitarian support. Moreover, unrelenting attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, in particular on energy infrastructure, continue to have a direct impact on Ukraine's social and economic development and on preparations for the upcoming winter months. We reiterate in no uncertain terms that all parties to the conflict must uphold IHL and the principles of distinction and proportionality. President, the world cannot afford to lose sight of the conflict in Ukraine. Wars of aggression constitute a serious violation of the UN Charter. They are an affront to the principles and values that unite us. They must never be normalized, justified, or rationalized. A world in which might is right is something that we can never accept. We must therefore focus our energies to reach a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. This senseless and unjustified war must be brought to an end. The Russian Federation must withdraw all its troops from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, and Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be restored. Until that day comes, Ukraine has a right to defend itself in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta. I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Thank you, Madam President. I wish to thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Jenca for his valuable insights. And I also acknowledge the presence of the permanent representative of Ukraine at this meeting. Madam President, the concurrent sessions before us today and tomorrow reflect the concerning pattern of the escalation that has come to characterize not only this conflict but also our deliberations in this chamber, edging us dangerously toward a profound global division. Despite global appeals for peace, we witness continued intensification of hostilities, exposing an alarming trend toward confrontation over resolution of the conflict. Since this conflict emerged, Mozambique has consistently urged all parties, including their allies, to refrain from aggressive posturing predicated on the assumption of unilateral advantage. Historical evidence consistently demonstrates that pursuing peace through military escalation rarely achieves lasting stability. Past conflict reveal that sustained military-focused strategies only deepen hostilities, amplify human suffering, and render diplomatic solutions even more elusive. History, especially Europe's own conflict-laden past, clearly demonstrates that conflicts driven by sequential retaliations, such as alliances fortification and third-party military involvement, often spiral beyond the control or original intention of the warring parties. Madam President, international law indeed recognizes the sovereign prerogative of states to forge alliances and partnership. Nevertheless, this right must be exercised in accordance with the UN Charter's foundational pledge to shield future generations from warfare's devastations and serving to reinforce international stability rather than compromise it. Madam President, this conflict stands at a critical crossroads, showing alarming indications of expansion beyond Ukraine's borders, endangering both regional and global stability. The alleged deployment of third-party forces marks a dangerous inflection point, heightening tensions and raising the stakes for all parties involved. We are reminded of Sun Tzu, timeless wisdom that, and I quote, the greatest victory is that which requires no battles, end quote. It's a principle that emphasizes the paramount importance of diplomatic engagement and strategic restraint of a military escalation. If there should be a battle, it should be for preserving pathways to sustainable peace. Mozambique, therefore, calls upon all parties to commit to immediate de-escalation. In accordance with the principle enshrined in the UN Charter, Mozambique firmly advocates for a negotiated resolution of this conflict. We call for an immediate ceasefire and the swift resumption of direct dialogue conducted in good faith to pave the way for enduring peace. The long-suffering populations and future generations deserve this mark of consideration. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, when we found out about the request for this meeting today in the Security Council, we were taken aback by the cynicism and the brazen attitude of our Western colleagues and the egregious double standards. We understand very well that the situation on the front for the Zelensky regime is a catastrophic one, especially after its hapless adventure in Kursk, which led to the collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces positions in Donbass, so much so that its Western mentors decided to obscure this unfavorable foil, which could affect the opinion of voters in these countries. But we thought that even for them, who have been using evidence in the line of highly likely, that they have limits when it comes to pushing open disinformation. Turns out there aren't any limits, and Washington, London, and company have reached a new low today. It was said at one point in this room that we dismantle washing machines and other appliances to get the microchips because we only had enough missiles for 1 or 2 days. Then we heard statements that we violate babies with spoons, catch people on the streets because no one wants to go fighting. Bucha, Kramatorsk, Mariupol, the Transfiguration Cathedral in Odessa, all were barefaced lies disseminated so as to tarnish the Russian armed forces, and they will become textbook examples in textbooks on disinformation and propaganda, as they became common in crude provocations by the West used so as to cover up the crimes of their collaborators in Kiev. I would like to thank the Ambassador Woodward for her care for the Russian budget. She used the expression "empowers Russia," and I would like to invite the Prime Representative of the UK to Russia so that it can see things for herself. But I fear that what you will see will disappoint you, because your characteristics are out of line with reality. Now, given the statements about the North Korean soldiers on our front should not surprise no one, because they all barefaced lies and they're trying to distract from truly significant problems that threaten international peace and security. And we see that again when we listen to the lamentations by the US and satellites. And the performance today has one goal: to try and post factum justify their own decision to send NATO troops so as to shore up the regime of the outdated dictator in Kiev. Covering up the facts that there are NATO soldiers and specialists on the territories under the control of the Kiev regime, regardless of what their guise, has become impossible. Foreigners are being destroyed by the dozen and hundreds every day. They're taken prisoners. They're in videos amongst the UAF soldiers. There are frequent obituaries for the high-ranking officers or specialists who supposedly tragically perished when they were walking in mountains or had a heart attack. whereas in actual fact they were eliminated together with the command posts or training bases or military factories in Ukraine. We also know that the hysterics surrounding the North Korean topic miraculously coincide with Mr. Zelensky signing a decree according to which foreigners are allowed to serve in UAF at commanding positions. I'm not even going to talk here about the continued pumping of the Kiev regime with weapons and intelligence, without which Zelensky cannot and the clique can no longer fight. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But I just want to put one question to you. Even if everything that's being said about the cooperation between Russia and North Korea by our Western colleagues is true, why is it that the United States and allies are trying to impose on everyone the flawed logic that they have the right to help the Zelensky regime, mobilize for that the military and intelligence of NATO, and Russian allies have no right to do a similar thing? Ladies and gentlemen, where do you get this neo-colonial feeling of your own exceptionalism and impunity, and your belief that what you're allowed to do, others are prohibited from undertaking? We know your misleading narrative stating that Ukraine is a victim and Russia is the aggressor. It only works for those who have no idea of the background of the Ukrainian crisis or simply do not want to know what it is. But all of our reasonable and sensible colleagues understand that our special military operation in Ukraine would never have happened if the Kiev regime, after the Maidan coup staged by the West, had not started a war against the civilians at Donbass, and then, after they were pushed back, they hadn't sabotaged the Minsk agreements enshrined by the Security Council. You can see what kind of victim Ukraine is in August, when the Zelensky gangs unprovoked attacked the Russian border region. And the internet is full of evidence of these bandits in uniform, their attacks against civilians, women and children, civilian cars, ambulances, their rapes, their lootings, destructions of houses and cattle. And the share of foreign mercenaries, Polish, American, British ones, by the way, is off the charts. Are these the people you're trying to present as victims of Russian aggression who have the right to self-defense? And these are the crimes, and the evidence for them was something that we demonstrated at the ARIA Formula meeting at the 25th of October. Your representatives came with already prepared speeches, fully overlooking the reality they had just been shown. That was the pinnacle of cynicism. Colleagues, the payback for the reckless and fatal Cook's adventure by Zelensky has arrived. And you, ladies and gentlemen, should adapt your trite speeches and invent something else more refined. Otherwise, it's just not convincing. And distracting attention from the true face or the animal scowl of the Zelensky junta, you will not be able to do. Madam President, the issue of cooperation with Pyongyang, on this our position is open. DPRK is a neighbor, close partner, and we're developing a relationship with many areas. Our interaction is transparent. We pay visits, sign international treaties, sign commercial contracts in various areas of bilateral interaction, and this is our sovereign right. I would like to underscore that the Russian interaction with DPRK in the military and other areas is in line with international law and is not a violation of it. It's not aimed against third countries, it's not a threat for the countries of the region or international community. And we intend to develop this cooperation in the future, and no one can prohibit us from doing that. On the 19th of June, as you know, we signed a treaty on the comprehensive strategic partnership between our country and DPRK. And this was a natural consequence of our relationship of fraternal friendship, of the fact that they reached a new high level, and of the geopolitical transformations, which, in the interest of mutually beneficial relationship, need to have a quality update in its legal basis. The treaty is not a secret, it's published. It states the basic principles for the further development of our links. They're aimed at deepening the partnership and strategic cooperation on a wide spectrum of priority areas on building a fair international system. And you can all see that for yourself when you read the text. Therefore, there are no reasons other than directives coming from our Western colleagues to present our cooperation as a threat for anyone. Madam President, we can see the Western spectacle in the Security Council today pursuing another goal. The Zelensky regime and collaborators for 2 years have been trying to compel the Republic of Korea to more actively cooperate with the Kiev regime and to have them provide and supply the much-needed lethal weapons. And here, the anti-Pyongyang frenzied rhetoric is very convenient for Washington, London, Brussels, because their own supplies is something that the Kiev regime has drained. We do hope that our South Korean colleagues will be wise enough not to fall for this trick. In any event, I can tell you that despite the current difficult period, we're trying to safeguard the preconditions for the resumption of the traditional good neighborly relations between Moscow and Seoul, and we value your restraint. We're also optimistic when we see the public opinion surveys in your country. They show that the absolute majority of people in the Republic of Korea do not wish to become involved in the Ukrainian conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Mr. Miroslav Jencha, Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia and the Americas, for his briefing. We welcome the presence of the permanent representative of Ukraine in this meeting. Sierra Leone remains deeply concerned about the escalating conflict in Ukraine, which has persisted for over 2.5 years. Recent intensification in fighting has resulted in further occupation of Ukrainian villages and regained territory in the Kursk region. We take note of Ukraine's letter dated 25 October 2024, alleging the deployment of military personnel of Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Ukraine has based its claim on intelligence reports and open source information. While these reports are allegations at this stage, they serve as a stark reminder of the broader destabilizing impact this conflict could have on regional and international peace. It is thus important to emphasize at this juncture the need for parties to the conflict to abide by international law and relevant Security Council resolutions. Madam President, Sierra Leone, having traversed its own path from conflict to peace, values the importance of dialogue, diplomacy, and adherence to international norms. We urge all parties to the conflict to exercise restraint and to engage in constructive dialogue to prevent any further escalation of the current situation. The conflict in Ukraine has already caused tremendous civilian suffering and disrupted essential services. It is imperative that we prioritize humanitarian considerations and the protection of civilians who invariably bear the brunt of this catastrophic conflict. Furthermore, we call on all member states to recommit to their obligations under international law, ensuring that any actions taken are in full compliance with the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. In this regard, the role of multilateral fora and mechanisms for dialogue becomes ever more critical. We also note the importance of good offices and the role the United Nations can play to establish lines of engagement. Sierra Leone also recognizes the importance of collaboration among nations to alleviate potential flashpoints. We encourage all stakeholders to engage in transparent communication and intelligence sharing, fostering an environment of trust and cooperation. Such collaboration is essential to accurately assess situations that may impact global security and stability. As we navigate these uncertain times, let us be guided by a shared commitment to peace and security. Sierra Leone stands ready to support efforts aimed at de-escalation and peaceful resolution, reaffirming our dedication to a world where diplomacy prevails over discord. In conclusion, Madam President, we further call for full respect of the national sovereignty, territorial integrity and unity of both Ukraine and the Russian Federation within their internationally recognized borders, and for the immediate cessation of hostilities. In doing so, we urge for good faith diplomatic efforts addressing the legitimate concerns of the involved parties. In light of recent developments, it is crucial for the international community to promote dialogue to prevent any escalation that may further endanger the peaceful resolution of the conflict in Ukraine through diplomatic means, as was envisaged in Article 33 of the Charter of the United Nations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone, and I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador. Thank you, Madam President. We're grateful to ASG Yencha for his informative briefing. Since the invasion of Ukraine began, we have witnessed the devastating consequences of the conflict. Figures are shocking. Thousands of civilian lives lost, communities destroyed, and a growing number of displaced persons who, as winter approaches, are now facing an even more precarious and desperate situation. Similarly, this conflict continues to exacerbate global tensions and impact the global economy at a time when the world should be focusing on working together to address several common challenges. Unfortunately, the spiral of violence fueled by the geographic spread of the conflict continues disproportionately to impact the most vulnerable, including women, children, older persons, and persons with limited mobility. In various regions of Ukraine, critical infrastructure, including ports and power stations, as well as residential areas, continue to be targets, and there is a tragic wake of civilian victims. Attacks against civilians and against civilian goods are banned under international law. They are unacceptable and must cease immediately. Ecuador would further appeal for unfettered humanitarian access to be facilitated, particularly in the most affected areas of the east and south of Ukraine, and we reiterate the importance of avoiding any action which could put at risk the security of nuclear installations in Zaporizhia and Kursk. Madam President, the recent public reports on the presumed mobilization of North Korean troops to Russia to be deployed in this conflict must be investigated. This is alarming, and it would be an illegal and very dangerous action. It is essential for the parties to exercise maximum restraint and to prioritize first and foremost the protection of civilians. My delegation reiterates its concern that if the conflict continues on this path, we would come closer to a critical point of no return. An increase in nuclear rhetoric and the intensification of hostilities are sources of global concern. For that reason, the efforts of the Secretary-General and of international actors seeking an end to this conflict must receive backing. Dialogue and diplomacy cannot be seen as red lines. In conclusion, I reaffirm Ecuador's commitment to the fundamental principles of international law and the UN Charter, in particular, respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. Within that framework, we support the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of Ukraine, and we join our voice with those calling on the Russian Federation to suspend its military operations, to allow for a negotiated solution leading to a just and sustainable peace, underpinned by international law and the principles of the UN Charter. Thank you, President. I thank the representative of Ecuador, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I wish to thank ASG Yencha for his briefing. I look forward to hearing from the representative of Ukraine and the DPRK later on. The Ukraine crisis has entered its third year. The fighting on the ground is continuing now, with heavy casualties among innocent civilians, massive infrastructure damage, an increasingly grave humanitarian crisis, and ever more prominent spillover effects. China finds this deeply deplorable and worrisome. We once again call on the parties to the conflict to remain rational and exercise restraint, earnestly abide by international humanitarian law, and do their utmost to protect the safety and security of civilians and civilian infrastructure, refrain from causing more harm and damage, and prevent the impact of the war on the region from becoming irreversible. To restore peace as soon as possible and promote a political solution to the Ukraine crisis is a shared aspiration of the international community and the common responsibility of all countries in the world. In this Security Council chamber, we have been calling on the parties to the conflict to show political will, meet each other halfway, and start peace talks as soon as possible. We also call on the international community to actively provide assistance and create favorable conditions for this. The current situation has reached another critical moment, boding increasingly severe and complex risks. We once again call on all parties concerned to abide by the three principles of no expansion of the battlefield, no escalation of fighting, and no provocation by any party in order to de-escalate the situation sooner and to prevent the situation from getting out of control. President, China's position on the Ukraine issue is consistent and clear. We have always stood on the side of peace and on the side of dialogue. We have always been committed to promoting talks for peace and finding a political solution. It is precisely on the basis of this position that China and Brazil have jointly issued the 6 common understandings on a political settlement of the Ukraine crisis, and together with the relevant countries of the Global South, we have initiated the establishment of the Group of Friends for Peace on the Ukraine crisis, in the hope of building more consensus for peace and consolidating the conditions for political settlement of the crisis. We will continue to maintain communications with parties concerned and play a constructive role in promoting a political settlement of the crisis. In conclusion, just now, some members in their statements mentioned the situation on the Korean Peninsula, on which we have also made our position clear repeatedly in this chamber. I wish to reiterate that China has always believed that maintaining peace and stability on the peninsula and promoting a political solution to the peninsula issue serve the common interests of all parties. We hope that all parties will work together to make constructive efforts to that end. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China. I give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President, and I also thank ASG Yencha for his briefing. Guyana is gravely concerned about the dangerous trajectory of this conflict. Each day, we hear more harrowing reports of the death and destruction brought upon innocent civilians who are bearing the brunt of this conflict. They did not ask for this war, and they have little means of escaping it. We share ASG Yencha's concern about the ramifications of any further escalation of this conflict, and reiterate our call for an immediate end to the unrelenting violence and violations of international law. While the Council's meetings on Ukraine have become predictable and routine, we must resist attempts to normalize this conflict and the suffering of civilians. It is this Council's duty to live up to its responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Bringing the war to an end must therefore be our foremost concern. Madam President, 2.5 years ago, on 23rd of February, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine stood before the General Assembly, pleading for the UN to take swift, concrete, and resolute actions to, and I quote, avert a new devastating catastrophe in Europe, end of quote. He sounded the alarm that day about Russian military forces amassed along the Ukrainian border and warned that every nation would become embroiled in the ensuing crisis if we fail to act. but there was no action from the Security Council. One day later, we all watched in disbelief as Article 2.4 of the UN Charter was violated and the most sacred tenets of international law trampled upon. Much has happened since then. Many more violations have been recorded on both sides of the front line. Homes, schools, hospitals, and other critical civilian infrastructure became the targets of missiles, and innocent civilians, their hapless victims. Almost in real time, we, the members of the Security Council, receive reports of the latest atrocities. Yet we have been unable to frontally address these violations. Oftentimes, we find ourselves being more spectators as these chambers become a theater for the latest public relations spins. All the while, the death toll and list of casualties continue to climb. Men, women, children, parents, grandparents, and babies. They were all waiting on this council to deliver swift, concrete, and resolute actions to stop the war, to stop the destruction, and to stop the suffering. Instead, we witness lives cut short, futures lost or paused, while pain and suffering multiply. Madam President, we are often told that this war must be won militarily. We're not convinced that this is the only option. This is why we applaud the efforts of those who have decided to work for peace, to develop peace plans and convene peace conferences. We understand that the plans may not individually offer the full spectrum of solutions being sought at this stage, but they are a step in the right direction. They represent an earnest desire of the members of the international community to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Guyana, as a small developing country, will continue to use its voice and seat in this council to support efforts aimed at ending the war and achieving lasting and sustainable peace. As an elected member, we came here with no illusions, but ready and prepared to work for peace. To be clear, our call for peace and dialogue by no means implies an indifference to violations of international law. On the contrary, we affirm that respect for the legal obligations enshrined in the UN Charter and international law must be upheld, and that the acquisition of territory by force must never be condoned. We also continue to call, as we do today, for full respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and for the Russian Federation to withdraw its military forces from the international recognized territory of Ukraine. We will continue to demand that this Council live up to its responsibility and take action to bring about a peaceful end to this war. It is our duty to change the dangerous trajectory this conflict is taking. Madam President, in closing, as you know, the mural that hangs behind you was gifted to the United Nations by the Kingdom of Norway. I think it apt today to recall the words of the Norwegian Foreign Minister, who said that it was meant to inspire those working in this chamber to carry out the core of the United Nations mandate. This is a responsibility that rests upon our shoulders, one that we all chose and promised to uphold, one that we cannot and must not abrogate. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I thank ASG Miroslav Viencha for his briefing. This is our second meeting in October to discuss the situation in Ukraine. Yet, we will have another meeting tomorrow regarding the same question. This denotes the importance given by the international community and this very Council to this issue, as well as the dangerous tensions that mark the conflict, especially during this period. The escalation trend that consistently governs the interactions and around this conflict has always been a source of deep concern for Algeria. From the very beginning of our term at the Security Council, we have always warned that escalation and polarization could lead nowhere but to the worst scenario. But those warnings have not been heeded. Both parties continued to strengthen their military capabilities, seeking a better position in a war that, like any other conflict, would have no winner. On the contrary, every day this conflict is causing more loss of lives, more destruction, and more harm to both Ukraine and Russia. Furthermore, its political and economic consequences continue to be felt not only in the region, but in the world at large, especially in developing countries. This negative trend must stop. Peace should be the only option, the top priority objective, and the unique leitmotif. Peace should not be lost in the limbo of polarization, misinformation and disinformation, geopolitical calculations or miscalculations, mutual accusations, and divergent perceptions. The United Nations, including our Council, were built on a solid basis that includes the purposes and principles of the UN Charter that we all agree on, as well as the norms of international law. 2, the virtues of diplomacy, dialogue, cooperation, and mutual understanding. 3, the fairness and effectiveness of multilateralism as a privileged platform to overcome complex situations. Therefore, let us make good use of this structure to achieve just and lasting peace. Let us give diplomacy and genuine dialogue the opportunity to deliver. Let us give peace the chance to prevail. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as a representative of Switzerland. And I would like to start by thanking the Assistant Secretary General Jenča for his statement. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. The allegations we have heard are deeply troubling and, if confirmed, would constitute not only violations of international law, but also a development with potentially serious consequences for European, Asian, and global security. Please allow me to elaborate. Firstly, the legal aspect seems very clear to us. Such a deployment of armed forces by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, if confirmed, would add to the growing number of well-founded reports of illegal arms transfers to Russia. Indeed, any arms transaction with the DPRK constitutes a violation of this Council's sanctions. This concerns the sale, purchase, import, and export of weapons to or from the DPRK. Under Resolution 2270, the hosting of trainers, advisors, or other officials for purposes related to military, paramilitary, or police training is also prohibited. While Resolution 2397 called for the repatriation of all foreign workers of the DPRK, it is inconceivable that the presence of thousands of troops could be reconciled with the letter and even less with the spirit of these binding resolutions. Thus, a violation of international law supports another. Violations of sanctions against the DPRK support Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. And in this context, Switzerland deeply regrets that the extension of the mandate of the panel of experts on the DPRK failed due to a Russian veto, while this panel was investigating allegations of illegal arms transfers between the DPRK and Russia. Secondly, like the vast majority of UN members, Switzerland condemns Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. It is appalling that, despite the clear and repeated calls from a very large number of members of the General Assembly and the International Court of Justice, Russia continues its military aggression. Sending armed forces to support it would run counter not only to these calls, but also to the spirit of the UN Charter itself. We call on the DPRK and all third parties to refrain from any action likely to fuel Russian military aggression. And we once again call on Russia to immediately cease all hostilities and withdraw its troops from all Ukrainian territory. And finally, the solicitation of such military support in direct violation of Council resolutions would further undermine the non-proliferation architecture established half a century ago under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Russia, as a depository state, is called upon to strengthen, not weaken it. The possible involvement of the DPRK's armed forces in Russia's military aggression against Ukraine also raises the specter of a supra-regional expansion of hostilities. Russia, as a permanent member of the Security Council, is called upon to maintain international peace and security, not undermine it. Switzerland believes that this body has a responsibility and a duty to respond to the widely shared call for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Switzerland continues to support the Secretary-General in seeking a peaceful solution and remains ready to contribute to all efforts to promote peace in accordance with the UN Charter, in particular the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty. I thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, Assistant Secretary General Yencha. I would have recognized here Putin's Kappa regime in the permanent state of the Soviet Union, but it has become the practice. He had already left the room. We requested this meeting to address another step taken by Moscow to further escalate its war against Ukraine. At the Security Council meeting on the 21st of October, Ukraine and a number of other delegations raised an issue of the engagement of the DPRK troops into the Russian armed aggression against my country. Since then, the situation has been evolving in a menacing direction. According to available information, the DPRK military personnel, consisting of up to 12,000 servicemen, is being trained at 5 training grounds in the Eastern Military District of the Russian Armed Forces. This contingent includes at least 500 officers of the DPRK Army, with at least 3 generals from the General Staff. Subsequently, it is planned to form at least 5 units or formations from DPRK military personnel consisting of 2,000 to 3,000 servicemen each. One such unit is equivalent to that of a motorized rifle regiment. The DPRK servicemen are supposed to wear Russian uniforms and use Russian small arms. They will also be provided with Russian identity documents. Notably, to conceal their presence, the DPRK servicemen are expected to be integrated into the Russian units manned by representatives of ethnic minorities from the Asian part of Russia. Among them, for instance, is the Special Buryat Battalion of the 11th Separate Air Assault Brigade of the Russian Airborne Forces. According to available information, between October 23 and 28, at least 7 aircraft carrying military personnel of up to 2,100 soldiers flew from the Eastern Military District to the Russia's border with Ukraine. The number of DPRK soldiers expected to be transferred from the Russia's Primorsky Krai by the end of October 2024 may reach 4,500. It is also expected that in November 2024, DPRK military personnel will begin directly participating in combat operations against Ukraine's defense forces. On October 26, 400 DPRK soldiers arrived in the western part of Russia's Kursk region. The area of their deployment was prepared by engineering units of the Moscow Military District of the Russian Armed Forces. Moreover, the preparatory work for deployment of additional DPRK forces in the above area is now underway. The above-mentioned DPRK units will likely operate in the area of responsibility of the 11th Separate Air Assault Brigade. According to information at our disposal, an operational group of 40 DPRK servicemen has been conducting reconnaissance in the area of responsibility of this brigade since October 20th. Madam President, even mice and cockroaches, but not the Russian ambassador in this chamber, know that none of the countries that provide assistance to Ukraine is under the Security Council sanctions. Yet, in its turn, receiving assistance from the fully sanctioned North Korea is a brazen violation of the UN Charter. It goes without saying that sending the DPRK troops to support Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is a flagrant violation of international law. Moreover, training by the Russian Federation of DPRK regular units constitutes a violation of Security Council resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2270. In turn, DPRK soldiers providing or receiving any training or other assistance related to use of arms, including ballistic missiles, is also a violation of the mentioned Council's resolutions. And yet, Russia continues its attacks on the DPRK sanctioned regime, and its final goal seems to be clear: to dismantle the entire system of global deterrence of the Pyongyang regime. We call on the Security Council and its 1718 Sanctions Committee to address the issue of non-compliance of the DPRK and the Russian Federation with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. Madam President, active involvement of the DPRK troops in the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine represents very bad news for the world. It is the most dangerous development over the recent period of the war in terms of its global implications. Building the interoperability of the Russian and DPRK armies constitutes a threat to Europe, the North Korean peninsula, its neighbors, and beyond. Some may reassure themselves that Russia needs DPRK soldiers merely as cannon fodder to continue their meat-grinder assaults against Ukrainian forces. However, this is only part of the truth and not the main point. The Pyongyang regime is not merely supplying its soldiers to Russia. It pursues its own interests and long-term goals. Those DPRK servicemen, especially officers who survived the Russian-Ukrainian war, will return to their region with exceptional experience in modern warfare. One may wonder how the Pyongyang regime plans to utilize these experienced units. The truth is that we all know the answer when we say that the war is gradually expanding from the European theater to the Far East. It is not solely because the entry and the formation points for the DPRK combat units are located there. It is also because they are likely to be used not only in Ukraine. Actually, it speaks volumes that Putin himself, contrary to his usual practice of denying everything, has not denied either the presence of DPRK forces or the far-reach plans that both dictatorships have in this regard. Referring to the article on mutual military assistance in their recent bilateral agreement on comprehensive strategic partnership, Putin openly threatened the world by stating that, I quote, "What and how we will do, that is our own business within the framework of this article." This is nothing more than bullying on a global scale by a criminal who is confident of his own impunity. This behavior is a result of the comforting tolerance which Russia's mafia state enjoys in response to its irresponsible and destructive attitude towards the United Nations and to the Security Council itself. For over 30 years of its presence in the Security Council, Russia has systematically and consistently undermined this body's capability to maintain peace and security. Therefore, nothing unpredictable has happened. This is just another episode of the Rutte series, which we have all been watching for many years, including in this chamber and on the UN webcast. Just recently, we condemned Russia for dismantling the monitoring mechanism of the DPRK sanctions regime. Now, this sanctions regime itself is under threat. The leniency of the Security Council towards Russia has been stretched so much that it is broken. The Council is broken, and as the Secretary General says, the system does not work for anyone. This is why we call for action. And if the Security Council is immobilized by Russia's presence, then we must seek other formats and forms of such action. We have heard now and then that Russia would never cross this or that red line of the civilized world. But open your eyes. Russia is not crossing your red lines. Russia is walking down a red carpet. A carpet woven from weak responses, unfounded hopes, and complacency. In truth, it is not even a red carpet, but a river of blood, one that began flowing the moment Russia was given the Soviet seat in the chamber in 1991. Do I need to remind anyone whose blood flows in this river? That is why I'm sorry to have heard so much skepticism that Russia would go so far as to openly establish a military alliance with the most notorious rogue state. But why this disbelief? Didn't Ukraine warn of the aggressive nature of the entity called the Russian Federation? Haven't Russia's neighbors, like the Baltic states, warned the same? What else needs to happen for the world to finally accept the truth that Russia will not cease further damaging the cornerstones of global security until they are dismantled or until Russia is stopped? And this is not an alarmist doomsday prediction from a pundit on a political talk show. It is simply a description of what is happening before your eyes, the same Rutte series we are all watching. Tomorrow there will be a new cheap episode here in the Security Council. Once again, you will have to come and listen to Russia's absurdities about the so-called threats related to supplying weapons to Ukraine. And what is most surprising is that even in the face of the evolving military alliance between Russia and the DPRK, there are still people who are desperately want to believe that limiting Ukraine's ability to defend itself, and now from two nuclear states, will somehow make these states more inclined towards peace. This position is either infantile or cynical. Binding the hands of defending state could only provide a few years of tranquility at the expense of Ukraine, its people, and its infrastructure. And Ukraine will never agree to such a scenario. I do believe that other responsible nations will not agree either. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you. Madam President, I'm addressing the Council on behalf of 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, and my own country, Latvia. We align ourselves with a statement to be delivered by the European Union. We thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Jenča for the comprehensive briefing. Since the beginning of its aggression against Ukraine, Russia, in this very chamber, has been boasting about its inevitable victory. However, the situation on the ground is different. The Kremlin, grappling with ammunition shortages and huge manpower losses, has not only turned to Pyongyang for military supplies, but now even for troop deployment. it is more than alarming that the DPRK has reportedly deployed 10,000 troops to Russia for further possible deployment to Ukraine. Russia has recruited a large number of interpreters while training the DPRK soldiers to use Russian military equipment, including drones. Boots on the ground of the third country's armed forces at the battlefield marks a significant escalation in Russia's aggression against Ukraine. By joining Russia's war of aggression, the DPRK violates the most basic rules of international law enshrined in the UN Charter, namely the prohibition of the use of force and the obligation to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of other states. The Baltic states condemn this fact in the strongest possible terms. We demand Russia to immediately cease all military operations and withdraw all troops and equipment from the entire territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Russia must also stop blatantly abusing its UN Security Council permanent member status. As mentioned by Council members, we clearly recall that in March, Russia vetoed extension of the mandate of the panel of experts for the UN Security Council's 1718 Committee on the DPRK. Recently, Russia's foreign minister has claimed that the DPRK's nuclear disarmament is a closed issue. These developments highlight how Russia is willing to exploit its P5 role and shield the DPRK from accountability in exchange for the latter's military support. By pursuing such opportunistic partnership, Russia and the DPRK are posing grave security risks and destabilizing both Europe and Asia with severe global repercussions. We call on the DPRK, also on Belarus and on Iran, to stop their assistance to Russia in waging its cruel war of aggression against Ukraine. The Baltic states also urge China, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, to safeguard principles enshrined in the UN Charter and to exercise its influence on Russia to end its war of aggression against its sovereign neighbor. Madam President, Russia and all accomplices must bear full legal and financial responsibility for their violations of international law. We must spare no effort to ensure comprehensive accountability for all crimes committed by Russia's leaders in Ukraine. Establishment of a special tribunal will serve to prosecute those responsible for the crime of aggression. We encourage other countries to support this proposal. Russia tries to rearrange the international system that only benefits aggressors. Russia tries to tear down what has been built by all of us. We must ensure that the global rules-based order remains resilient in the face of these actions. The Baltic states support just peace in Ukraine, based on Ukraine's peace formula that is rooted in principles of the UN Charter and international law. We encourage all member states of the United Nations to join it. In conclusion, let me reiterate that the Baltic states strongly support Ukraine's exercise of its inherent right for self-defense and reaffirm our full solidarity with Ukraine in restoring its territorial integrity and sovereignty. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states, the candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Georgia, as well as Monaco, align themselves with this statement. I would also like to thank ASG Jenscha for his important briefing. Madam President, here we are again, witnessing yet another deeply alarming escalation in Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine. In direct violation of the UN Charter, there's now an expansion of military cooperation between the DPRK and Russia, including through the deployment of DPRK troops to potentially participate in Russia's illegal war of aggression. There must be unequivocal and universal condemnation of these developments with no caveats. Participation of DPRK troops in Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine would constitute an additional serious breach of international law, including the principles of the UN Charter. It would represent a unilateral hostile act by the DPRK at the reckless invitation of Russia, with grave consequences for European and global peace and security. The European Union is ready to explore necessary actions as a response in coordination with international partners. DPRK must immediately stop providing support to Russia's illegal war efforts. In June, just this June, the Security Council discussed DPRK's illegal and destabilizing behavior as demonstrated by its continued pursuit of nuclear and ballistic missile programs, as well as its deepening military cooperation with Russia, particularly through arms transfers. These arms transfers openly violate UNSC resolutions and undermine peace and security in Europe and on the Korean Peninsula. The DPRK's ongoing support for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine illustrates how closely linked European security is to that of the Indo-Pacific. With this disturbing shift of position on the denuclearization of the DPRK, Russia relinquishes its key obligation from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, including to prevent nuclear proliferation, and violates multiple Security Council resolutions adopted with Russia's support. Russia's deepening military cooperation with the DPRK sends also a clear message, as if one were needed, that it is not sincerely interested in a just, comprehensive and lasting peace. Instead, Russia is escalating its aggression by desperately seeking any help for its war, including from actors that are disrupting global peace and security. The EU strongly condemns third countries' continued support for Russia's war of aggression and urges them to cease all assistance. This includes not only direct military support, but also the provision of dual-use goods and sensitive items that sustain Russia's military-industrial base. President, tomorrow, Russia has once again convened this Council in an attempt to divert attention and resources from its aggression against Ukraine and the dramatic consequences for Ukraine and the world. It is an abuse of the UN system. Ukraine enjoys an inherent right to self-defense and to regain full control of all of its territory within its internationally recognized borders. Supporting Ukraine and its people to defend themselves from Russia's aggression is therefore legitimate and fully in line with international law and the UN Charter. We will continue to support Ukraine and to defend the UN Charter and respond to Russia's aggression, and we will do so for as long as it takes. Madam President, the European Union strongly supports a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine, based on the UN Charter. Under the Charter, Russia, the aggressor, must withdraw all its troops from the entire territory of Ukraine. It must stop attempting to annex illegally occupied territories, stop targeting civilians and destroying civilian infrastructure, and most certainly stop recruiting foreign troops to help it expand its war. Colleagues, any serious proposals for peace must be based on the UN Charter and international law as clearly laid out by UN General Assembly in its resolutions. All countries desiring a just, comprehensive and lasting peace should keep conveying this UN message loudly and clearly to Russia's leadership. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lambrinidis for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. Under the coercive demand of the United States in the following forces, UN Security Council convened again an unlawful meeting which squarely ran counter to the fundamental spirit of the UN Charter to promote development, friendly relations, and cooperation among nations. I strongly denounce the United States and its followers for holding this meeting to distort a sense of the situation out of their hostile policies and sordid political motives against DPRK and Russian Federation. If UN Security Council has to convene a meeting, it should duly call into question the crime against humanity of Israel and its accomplice of the United States. Israel massacred tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians, including women and children, using the weapons of the mass destruction provided by the United States. Should UN Security Council hold a meeting, it will have to naturally take issue with Ukraine's aggressive act of invading the Russian People's Sacred Territory of the Kursk, the killing civilians and destroying civilian infrastructure. Those countries that call for this meeting, including the United States, are main culprits of the destructing peace that inflicted serious harm on the global peace and security, staking their fate on aggression against a sovereign state and interference in their internal affairs. Such fact itself clearly proves the unlawful nature of this meeting. Today, Ukrainian situation is the leading crisis in security environment of Europe. It was caused by the United States and the West, which infringed upon legitimate security interests of the sovereign state by pursuing NATO's reckless eastward advance and expansionist policy. Since outbreak of the Ukrainian situation, the United States and the West have escalated their supplies of the various lethal equipment to the Kiev Authority, including main battle tanks, fighter planes, cluster, and depleted uranium bombs. They also gave green light to using those weapons to strike Russian territory. Emboldened by them, the Ukraine launched missile strike in last June on Russian territory Sevastopol with US-supplied ATACMS, causing over 150 innocent civilian casualties, including children. In August, it invaded Kursk, killing numerous civilians through indiscriminate missile and drone attacks. It is open secret now that the United States and the West are systematically providing Ukraine with intelligence data from reconnaissance satellites targeted with precision-guided weapons, even putting mercenaries into the country. Out of their hopeless ambitions to inflict strategic defeat on Russia, US lead NATO and the West instigate the Kiev Authority to seek confrontation, only to plunge Ukrainian situation into the phase of a protracted war and bring love to the brink of the new world war. All facts undisputably prove that the hysterical reaction of the United States and the West to convene this meeting today is aimed at covering up their crime of inviting prolonged Ukrainian situation and devoting focus of public opinion elsewhere. The biggest threat to international peace and security at the present as act of the United States is ally against peace, who are obsessed with hegemonic ambition to stir up confrontation and conflict among countries, while making frantic efforts to strengthen their aggressive alliance and war moves. From several decades ago, the United States has kept in constant stand by hundreds of thousands of aggressive forces and the latest military hardware on and around the Korean Peninsula, the world's the most dangerous hotspot, under the pretext of the strengthening alliance, and it staged dozens of the war exercises of various kinds and types against the DPRK annually, posing serious threats to peace and security in the region. Recently, the alliance between United States and ROK has evolved into a nuclear-based military bloc and nuclear war alliance into the sense of the word, which is in sharp contrast to the past. Thus, nuclear threat against DPRK today has become all more actualized and maximized. Such being the case, United States brought together as the following forces to convene Security Council meeting targeting independent sovereign state. It cannot but a mockery of an insult to the UN Charter. The DPRK and Russian Federation are entitled to develop overall bilateral relations in all fields, including politics, economy, military, and cultures, in full conformity with recognized norms of international law and the Treaty on the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership concluded between two countries. If Russia's sovereignty and security interests are exposed to and threatened by continued dangerous attempts of the United States and the West, and if it is judged that we should respond to them with something, we will make unnecessary decisions. Pyongyang and Moscow maintain close contact with each other on mutual security and development of the situation. The international community should never tolerate the high-handedness and arbitrariness of the United States its followers in their attempt to impose hegemonic and unipolar system domination, but will have to wage courageous struggle to safeguard genuine international justice and global peace and stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I need to take the floor to respond to the comments made by the representative of the Kim regime. I would remind everyone, this is a regime that has violated multiple UN Security Council resolutions and with regard to its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. That's the important point here. And the activities that it's carrying out in support of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, particularly through the deployment of troops to Russia, which we expect will be used in Ukraine, is a dangerous, very dangerous escalation of the situation. The other troubling factor here is this destabilizing activity has the support of two permanent members of the Security Council, and we all know those countries to which I'm referring. And these destabilizing activities are a major threat to peace and security, not only in Europe, but in the Indo-Pacific. Should DPRK's troops enter Ukraine in support of Russia, they will surely return in body bags. So I would advise Chairman Kim to think twice about engaging in such reckless and dangerous behavior. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
The 9,763rd meeting of the Security Council is resumed. I wish to remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 3 minutes maximum.